All right, so I'm going to use Kotlin and Ktor for the first time. You probably know by now that professionally, I worked as a Java Spring dev. It may be a couple years since I've done that professionally, but that's what I got best at, so that's why I keep milking the Java dev thing. But did I just mimic milking? I'm sorry. What I'm looking to build though, what I think would be fun and would actually utilize like Ktor's coroutines and things like that would be a reverse proxy. I'm thinking of a reverse proxy for Docker where you have each container and then the reverse proxy does what it needs to do. So like coroutines will handle the async requests. Ktor has a built-in HTTP client for forwarding traffic. And then of course we'll have routing, which routes it to whatever backend service container that it needs to go to. Things like that. Plus then I can add middleware to handle logging and request filtering if I want to. I'm not sure yet. I guess we'll see how far along I get. But first, I wanted to get decently acquainted with Kotlin. And luckily for me, they had this thing called Kotlin Koans right here. So it's a series, let me see this real quick. A series of exercises designed primarily for Java devs to help you become familiar with the Kotlin syntax. And you can do it online, or you can do it in IntelliJ right here, which as you can see is what I did. I didn't do all of them as you can see, but like I already knew this ahead of time. I mean, like take a look at my script right here that I wrote before I started doing Kotlin Koans because I thought I was going to record that part before I did it. But I literally say, I know for a fact I won't be doing all of these, just a few. I'm self-aware enough to realize I'll get bored after a handful and just want to dive into the project. And that's what I did. So here's me playing around with Kotlin Koans. So here was the first exercise and it told me to open up this functions page and read about functions. So that's what I did. And then I went back to see what it wanted me to do after like, okay, functions, they look familiar. It just wanted this start function to return okay. Whew, glad I got that one right. Now named arguments, where we got to make the function here join options, return the list in a JSON format. So I went and read what it recommended, at least a little bit of it, default and named arguments, but it basically gave us the answer in the description. The library function join to string is declared with default values for parameters, but you can see it has separator, prefix, postfix, but we can only use 2 arguments as it says up here. So if I wanted to return that list in JSON, what should I use? Probably the prefix and the postfix with those brackets so that these brackets surround the existing list of ABC. It makes sense to me, so that's what I did and it worked. Oh yeah, quick interruption. I said this later in the video. I don't know if I've removed it, but I wanted to do it sooner in the video right now and let you know that this video is sponsored by Ktor, JetBrains, who's created IntelliJ IDEA, Rust Rover, PyCharm, WebStorm. You know JetBrains. But they also created Kotlin. They also created Ktor, which Ktor is, well, I'll say this. It's written in Kotlin, specifically for Kotlin. It's free, open source. It's a framework for building web applications and microservices, and it's very lightweight. It has plugins that you can utilize. Oh, here you go. Simple and fun. Create async client and server applications, anything from microservices to multi-platform HTTP client apps in a simple way. Open source, free, and fun. I'll leave a link to it in the description below so you can learn more about it and see how it can apply to your work. This is future me after I built most of the proxy. I don't know if I'm going to keep going with it from here on out, but it was fun. And should I say simple? I did not mean to say fun when that says fun right there. Okay. Anyway, back to Kotlin Koans. So that was the named argument. Now this challenge exercise is the default argument. It wants me to take all of these Java overloads and condense them down into a single Kotlin function. And I'm not going to lie, that sounds pretty nice. And what I notice is that the A is red underline, number equals 1, and 2 uppercase equals true are red underline. So I'm like, oh, maybe it wants me to hop into the parameters of the foo function and then assign values to it. So I guess that's what I'll do. And my logic was, okay, the very first one is A, so we'll just make that one A. But if it wants to change from number to 1 and then 2 uppercase to true, then I'll make sure that number and 2 uppercase are the opposite or different. So I did number 0 and then 2 uppercase equals false. And that was wrong. And I'm like, oh, wait, over here in the Java code, it says 42. So I guess the number should be 42. And then I test that and we're good to go. I also discovered this community submission tab over here, and somebody else did it like this. They just added everything specifically to the functions. But when I looked at the actual solution, it was what I did. Well, actually, I assigned an empty string to name just because I had already had something there. So I'm like, oh, let me just try deleting this. And I forgot that okay, if it's empty, then why am I adding this here? Anyway, it was close enough. It worked. And then triple quote strings where I read, I basically see the answer. I have to replace trim indent with trim margin and then add what I want to trim. Then I ran into some regular expressions where I had to replace the, 01 for January, 02 for February, and replace those numbers with the 3-letter abbreviation like this. For nullable types, I had to rewrite the Java code to only have one single if statement. And you see sometimes where it'll try to autocomplete. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not. So I have to make sure it's correct anyway, and this was. And then the nothing type. I had to read all about the nothing type just to come back in, add the nothing type to this function. And then I needed to pass a lambda to this any function, which I got right, but I also got wrong because apparently Kotlin has this implicit it, which that's what I should have done. It's cleaner. And then me doing data classes was stupidly funny. I have this, nice old Java code, which I'm used to. Java 8 is what I code in, and I try a whole bunch of different things. None of it feels right, or it's giving me errors and da-da-da-da. And then I'm like, wait a minute. After I'm doing a little more research, okay, let me try a few more things. Let me try this. And then this, it's basically the record, the newer Java record, which again, I don't code in newer Java, which I probably should, but this was the answer. Now, smart cast exercise where I had to rewrite this Java code into the when expression. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is easy. It basically just copy right there. And I'm like, oh crap, it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Oh yeah, I forgot the eval. And then I'm trying to figure out how to format this properly. I'm like, wait, how the heck do I format this? Oh yeah, okay, each one needs to be its own eval and then add those together. We're good to go. Renaming on import here was a hard one. Just had to, give them specific names. Then I needed to convert int and pair into rational numbers. And then some operator overloading, although while not 100% correct, autocomplete took most of the fun away from this one. Then I had to hit round 2 of ranges because I had a little typo in the first one and just wanted to double check, make sure I'm doing it all right so I don't get it wrong a second time, and that was good. Yeah, I made it pretty far. I ain't gonna lie. Further than I thought I was gonna make it. But I will say, I would like to finish this up at some point. I think that every single language should have the equivalent of a Kotlin Koans. I understand not all of them are, Kotlin is Java, just a little bit nicer, right? I understand not all languages are that similar to another language. And nicer, I guess, is subjective. Like current modern Java is pretty dang nice too. So there's not like a one-to-one kind of Koans example for all languages, but something that could just take you through the basics of the syntax and let you figure it out and things. That, you saw it, you just watched it. All languages should have that. Now it's reverse proxy time. So I'm going to use IntelliJ IDEA to whip up a new Ktor project. I'm able to generate a Ktor project right here, and then you're able to add plugins, which just adds more boilerplate, and all I'm adding is call logging and routing. There are more plugins that I would need if I decide to expand the project, but for right now, I'm just going to go with these because I can always add more later. So we have monitoring and routing configure. In here, we have our main function, which application.kt is like our main.kt. So here's our Ktor server. How long does this take to index? All right, we're done indexing. Let's run this. Just stock. We haven't changed anything. We have configure monitoring here. We have configure routing here, which, okay, so it works. All right, so now that this is working, what I want to do is do proxy routing. This is a Ktor server listening on 8080, forwarding our requests. What we want to do now is intercept those requests, meaning be able to modify them or what have you, direct them to whichever service we want them to go to, which we'll set up the services here in a second. And by the services, those will be individual Docker containers, each service running in its own, and then we'll be able to load balance. But I just realized I did not discuss what a reverse proxy is or does for those who don't know and why I'm building one. I talked about kind of what Ktor can do and why reverse proxy is a good project to learn Ktor or even learn a new language, because it's something that you ought to know as a dev. And I think some of the best projects that you can build are the things that you can know, so you can learn two things at once. So here's a regular proxy, which you've probably had experience with, where like all these are the user's devices that go through a proxy and then access the internet. If you have blocked websites at your school, well, they probably have a proxy with content filtering that blocks those websites. And then you go ahead and use your own proxy to get around this proxy so you can access those websites at school. Y'all still do that, right? Or you just use your phones and use cellular? Huh. I guess y'all could do that instead. Anyway, so a reverse proxy is over here between the internet and the server, as opposed to being in between the client and the internet. And a reverse proxy can do the same exact thing. So if you're trying to access something and there are multiple services, it'll take your request based upon the path that you included or information that you included. It'll route to the correct backend service or Docker container in our instance, and then be able to do what you had requested and then respond back to you. And it'll only do as you requested, as long as we didn't implement something in this reverse proxy that blocked you from doing it. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense. Here's one that is much simpler, right? It's okay, it's a little more complex. That's what we're coding, so let's get to it. So I needed to add HttpClient to my application, my reverse proxy here, to make outgoing requests from the proxy to the backend services. And then I tried to get the AI assistant to do it for me just to test things out. And while it added client core, it didn't add client CIO until I made a new line, and then it recommended that. So autocomplete finished the job of the AI assistant. There we go. And CIO. Oh, do I need CIO? I'm not sure that I do. Yep. That's what I want. And CIO is notable because it stands for coroutine based IO, which is exactly what I want. I want to use Ktor's coroutines, but I didn't specify CIO as the HTTP client engine, even though the docs recommended it, because it already defaults to CIO. So specifying it just felt redundant. I mean, sure, it makes it more explicit and it's probably good practice in case the default changes, but whatever, it all works the same. I guess it would be service and then whatever the path would be. To capture the rest of the URL path, you can use this. Yeah, okay. That's what I thought I remembered. So I want this. Then we can val service. Good night. Call parameter service. I don't want this unknown though. That's weird. And then val path. Call parameters get all path. Join to string separator. That's exactly what I want. Path. Huh. Pretty nice call respond text. What we'll do, I'm recording right, is services. How the heck do you print? Okay, there we go. That works. I actually don't think that's right. Service, isn't it something like this? So now I think I'm going crazy because it recommended me to use the pluses, but then I remember seeing that $ prefix, which I thought was the right way. So I asked the AI assistant, see if it can explain it for me. This code is invalid Kotlin syntax because service is not properly concatenated with the path. Isn't that not what it recommended me to do though? That's what confused me. Oh, I just typed it in wrong. It achieves the same result as the first example, but is more verbose, harder to read, and potentially error prone if you forget to add spaces formatting. So it does the same thing, it's just not as good. That's kind of what I thought. Now what I need to do is use this to forward the request. And since it's coroutine based, HTTP calls are automatically non-blocking, which is like Spring's web client, but the big difference here is how async is handled. Ktor skips reactive types like mono and flux. Everything is just async by default. I don't have to manage threads or thread pools. Ktor makes my route handler suspend function, so client.get, which I'm about to write, runs async without blocking the server. Like, this is just the beauty of having coroutine native. Everything's built around coroutines by default instead of the other way around. That's all right now. But what happens if we have no service? If we have no service, we should do this before all of this crap. Let's see if this works. Thank you. Ooh, it's gonna be good. Taking a break. Ooh, oh. You can't tell me that's not fire. Ooh. Okay, all right. So it's running, as we can see. I think I know where I would left off. Y'all ever get that feeling after lunch? You're just like, I don't know if I'll be able to get anything done. Just depends. Not a lot of carbs there, so I should be good. All right, I'm gonna come down here. And what I want to do is, didn't I already curl something? I want to curl this. Reverse proxy is running. I'm going to use, what's it called? JSON placeholder. I'm going to use this. Can you see that? Well, it's tiny, but you can see it. You can see good enough. Proxy, and this is going to be our service and then path. Wait, that's right. Got to make this 8000. Failed to connect localhost. Wait, this is not how I formatted this. How did I format this? 8000/to-do/1. Yeah, so this is what I want from my local stuff, but we should add something just so I can test this. So that's what I did. I need the backend URL to be able to use a JSON placeholder resource just to test it out. And it just takes anything really that contains JSON placeholder and converts it into the URL with the service and path included, which is just the normal URL. Yeah, this is just hard coded in there. And then I also, this keeps recommending to do HTTPS, but are my containers going to be secure? No, they'll probably just be HTTP. So, I mean, if it's all local, I don't think it really matters. I don't know why I have 2 responds in here. We also have to take into consideration what happens if it fails. All right, so let's try this again. Yeah, you can see that this time with proxy does not exist.com. This is fake. Tester. Well, it just doesn't work. However, what if I take this and I do something that non-exist/23? Yeah, it tries, but it doesn't return anything. And again, you cannot see that. So what we would want is, well, for us to know what in the world's going on. So I don't know if this is overkill, but if service is null, that's exactly what I want, then call.respond HTTP bad request. What is it called? Status code bad request. Missing service parameter. That is fine, but I also need to return get. That's right. This, I guess, would be taken out. Yep. What does this recommend? Yeah, that's what I wanted in the first place. Okay. Now I'm wrapping this in a try catch because, let's be honest, stuff breaks, particularly my code. But Kotlin doesn't force me to handle checked exceptions like Java does, or like Rust makes you do literally everything and handle all errors and failures and things that I just like to ignore. But I only need to catch errors if I actually want to do something with them in Kotlin. In Spring specifically, I'd probably throw like a custom exception and set the global error handler with the controller advice, but Ktor makes it a bit easier. If something fails, I just catch it and send an HTTP response and I'm done. Oh yeah, and since client.get is a suspending function, like I mentioned previously, if this throws an exception, it's not going to crash a thread or mess up the server. Coroutines handle all of that. Okay, let's see. Let's see if you can actually see this. This is incorrect. It would help if I actually reran the code. And there we go. We got a 404 with a URL that contains JSON placeholder, so we now actually know what the problem is if it happens. And then I run it with one that does not contain JSON placeholder, and it returns backend service unavailable as it should. All right, so now let's do this with some actual Docker containers, which means I have to set up a few dummy services, I guess. And that's what I did. And since it doesn't really matter, I just whipped these up with ChatGPT, just little Node.js backend service, a Flask backend service, and a Docker file in order to, build it so that we can run it. And I'm back. If you need to get up to speed with Docker and kind of how it works and things of that nature, I made a video about Docker recently, I think within the past few months. Check it out. There we go. That's exactly what we wanted. Okay. And then 2. Yeah. In the future, again, I can change this for Docker stuff. I can also build something that is get Docker. There we are. It would be something to get the Docker services. And then basically, so like for every single service, I don't have to do it manually like this. I could create another function that based on like, it could go into Docker PS and based on this. So we have backend service 2 right here, backend service 1. We have the ports and all that information here. So we could do it if I wanted to expand it into something that's actually like dynamic to auto detect what to turn the backend URL into based on the service, but I don't feel like doing that right now. So we're going to hard code it in just like that. Okay. Yeah, I probably should. Where am I at? And that's what I did. I created getDockerServices, and then I tried to get the AI assistant to do it, which it did kind of, but not exactly like what I was thinking. And I did a little bit of, other research as well to kind of see how to go about this. So I made some adjustments. I was messing around with it. The main idea here is so we don't have to hard code every single one. What if we had 10 or 20 different services on the back end? We don't want to have to manually map them with that previous code from 8002 to 8002 or whatever the heck I had. This way it gets the Docker PS, it matches up the name and the port, and then it's able to do everything within routing, but it wasn't perfect. So all right, so not gonna lie, I threw this old code, how it looked before, into actually ChatGPT and came back with this. If we do 2, yeah, we'll get the Flask back in. But if we come in here, so this is through the proxy, as you can see. This is through our proxy, and it is routing traffic to the correct ports, so we get the responses back, and this is just going, this is bypassing the proxy, going directly to Docker PS, directly to our backend service. Cool. All right, now what would be fun would be to include traffic control. So what would be cool is to allow developers to block or modify or what have you any of these requests in real time. Because some of these, like what if we have API/admin? I probably don't want you to be able to access that data, so I would block it. I'd also need to make sure I have persistence. So if like it restarts, that blocking mechanism remains. But I'm going to worry about the block and unblock parts first. I'll worry about persistence later. So I'm going to write some code. We're going to try to have AI write code, get it wrong. I'm not going to write some code that lets me block and unblock proxy routes dynamically. And I'm going to store the blocked endpoints in a mutable set of, which is not exactly the same as a hash set, but it is in memory. It's an in-memory set like a hash set. There is what is a hash set of in Kotlin, which is one-to-one to hash set, but that doesn't maintain order. I don't really need to maintain order, but mutable set of does maintain order. And I'm not locked into hash sets, so it's a bit more flexible. But what I think is pretty cool is how I don't have to use the request body annotations in order to grab the request body. All I have to do is the call.receive, as you see. And I mean, don't get me wrong, both of them work. However, it's a bit cleaner and a bit easier. And then, of course, we're doing routing, proxy, block, proxy, unblock routing here. No annotations in sight of REST controller or request mapping like in Spring, which, don't get me wrong, that makes sense for bigger apps, but for something like this, it's just lightweight, and like this approach feels cleaner, Ktor's approach that is, which would work for bigger apps. I'll just do it different. Like I would probably extract the route definitions into separate functions and then register them inside configure routing, or do something like controllers in Spring and use the separate route modules. But I don't need to, not in this project. Yeah, so if I post something to proxy block, it'll add to blocked endpoints right here, and it'll respond saying it's been blocked. But if we do proxy unblock, then it'll remove that from blocked endpoints and let us know that. All right, so if I wanted to test this out to see if that part actually worked, so blocked API data. So it's blocked, however, we haven't done anything with routing because we need to check to see if it is blocked before we forward the response or the request. Before we forward the request to the service, we got to see if it's blocked or not, and we do that in here. And the more I use call.respond, the more I like it over the return response entity in order to return like HTTP status. Pretty nice. And technically that API data is already blocked because that still worked, as you can see right here. So what I could do is, if I want to curl, let me just pull something like this. So localhost 8080 proxy backend service 2 API data. Oh yeah, that's right. We didn't persist it. I restarted this. It's just in memory, so I had to redo it. So like if I were to rerun it right now, and it would all restart, nothing would be blocked. That's an issue that future me will face, which is right now. As we've talked about, all the block paths disappear because they're in memory. They disappear when the server restarts. I'd forgotten that, but what I decided to do was just write them all to a file. I'm not going to set up a database for this. Not going to use Redis. Obviously, if this was going to scale, I would not be just storing it in a text file, but this is not going to scale. So small project, let's just roll with this. Oh, check it out. You can barely see it. I'm not going to. Strawberries, cheese, chicken, potatoes, crackers. I'll eat that in a sec. Let me fix the AI's mistake. All right, now we're able to actually test it out. So I'm going to rerun everything, and that's really annoying how I go through, I code it, my thought process. I've done this twice now. Don't look up. That's why if you ever see me like glancing up to this monitor, I'm looking to make sure that I'm recording and I'm recording the right thing. During that process, I did not do that. All right, so we're here good. And what I want, because we have to re-block it, because remember it didn't persist before, we just restarted everything. We want to block it here. So blocked that, and let's make sure it actually works. So we do that. Access to API data is blocked. We're good. And I should have given us a way to actually look at, to see, oh, well, I can go over here, see if a file has been created. This has API data, so that should still be there when I rerun it over here, which again, last time it removed everything because it was just stored in memory. But this time we're actually storing it within the file, and we're coming back. We are loading the file, right? We're loading blocked endpoints. Yeah, so we're making sure this is clear and then adding everything to what is in memory, which is blocked endpoints, and then it runs through just like normal. So basically this is basically just taking whatever information is in here and putting it back into here. And then it can run through that again. So if I were to come over here, terminal, I haven't done the X post again, this should still be access blocked. Perfect. So that's it. That was my first real project with Kotlin and Ktor. Overall, I mean, I gave you my thoughts throughout the video. Solid. I'm not going to sit here and say that it is a one-to-one replacement for Java Spring, because Spring I've really only ever used in big projects. Ktor, I mean, this is not a big project, nothing that's scaled, no enterprise applications, but for, as far as I can say, for quick and efficient backend services, it's solid. Kotlin and Ktor, it was really nice to use. And some of that syntax was really nice. The thing I like is that I'm able to build something simply, instead of building out all of this infrastructure or worrying about all of this code that I have to integrate just to get something simple to work. Overall, I like it. Let me make that very clear. And I also want to make something else very clear. I understand that this video is sponsored by Ktor. I gave you all my honest thoughts. I wasn't trying to pit the two against each other, Ktor and Spring, but that's what I have experience in. So that's kind of what I have to compare it to. And that's what I was going based off of. And I picked a project that is very heavy on Ktor's strengths. But that was the point, because I wanted to see, by building the reverse proxy with Docker, where we had the route handling, where we had the coroutines, where we had all of these other things, I wanted to see how it did. I wanted to see the strengths where they were strongest for Ktor. But overall, this was a fun project. Let me know if you like videos like this. I make a lot of videos kind of, I guess, similar to this. I could have made this longer, similar to the Rust video, but like 3 or 4% of y'all finished the Rust video, which is still over 1,000 people based on the amount of views that it currently has, but that's pretty low. So I'm going to try to keep, condense down this content like I normally do. Maybe, just maybe, if there's enough interest, I'll upload like the extended cut on like another channel or something. I don't know. Y'all let me know. All right. Y'all have a good one.